Young Turks now has audio, the TYT Audio Network, podcasts of some of your favorite shows and new shows, including one with Nina Turner, former Ohio State Senator. She's going to do We the People with Nina Turner, talking about equality and justice and seeing that through the eyes of regular Americans who are affected by politics and policy. Everybody check it out at tyt.com/audio.
Following Donald Trump's meeting with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-Un, he is now essentially reassuring Americans that there is nothing to worry about, that in fact, the United States no longer faces a nuclear threat from North Korea. So he made these statements through a series of tweets, as he usually does, and I want to read those tweets to you and then give you, a little more follow-up information on this summit. So Trump had tweeted, quote, "Just landed a long trip, but everybody can now feel much safer than the day I took office. There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Meeting with Kim Jong-Un was an interesting and very positive experience. North Korea has great potential for the future." Now, mind you,
it's a positive tweet from him. It's usually pretty negative, usually.
It was a positive tweet. Now, before we delve into the nuances of our commentary and what we think about all this, I just want to preface this entire conversation for anyone who isn't clear that we are in favor of diplomacy. We are in flavor of This is 1,000 times better than the way Trump handled the North Korea situation months ago, when he was insulting Kim Jong-Un, when he was mentioning the possibility of nuclear war, when he was talking about the size of his nuclear button in relation to Kim's nuclear button. This is a much better path. With that said, to make a statement in regard to North Korea no longer being a nuclear threat is irresponsible and it honestly not right. It's just not right, because North Korea has done nothing yet. Nothing has been done yet. Okay, so North Korea as it stands is still a nuclear threat. However, the tensions have lessened, thankfully, because Trump decided to take this diplomatic route. So again, overall, this is good news, but let's not lose sight of what the reality of the situation is.
Yeah, the tension came down from where he raised it to earlier this year.
Exactly, so he escalated tensions, and since he had set expectations so low for everyone, now he's expecting to get a cookie because he's managed to de-escalate the situation a little bit.
Well, and also remember, in addition to the fire and fury tweets and the sort of social media provocation of North Korea last year, we also had reports from inside of the White House that they were considering a bloody nose strike, which means beginning a war with North Korea. And also bear in mind, he recently brought on to his crew John Bolton, a guy who desperately wants to bomb North Korea.
That's
he was
right.
at that meeting, actually, at the summit.
So again, overall, this is good news, but his statement makes me reminiscent of something that George W. Bush said during his tenure. This is a video from back in May of 2003. This was only a couple months after we had invaded Iraq. And he thought it was a good idea to give this mission accomplished speech, which he got a lot of criticism for by a lot of people on the left at the time, and then later by a lot of people in general. Take a look.
Thank you all very much, Admiral Kelly, Captain Card, officers and sailors of the USS Abraham Lincoln, my fellow Americans. Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
So in May of 2003, George W. Bush made it seem as though the mission in Iraq was a mission accomplished.
Well, things went pretty smoothly after that.
Yeah, everything was great. After that, there was this democratic uprising in Iraq, and we were able to bring all of our troops back. And of course, that's not how it worked out. Look, the point that I'm trying to make here is, again, the diplomacy is fantastic. However, there's a lot of hard work that lies ahead, and I don't want people to become complacent and just nod their heads and be like, yeah, that's it. Trump signed some deal that's incredibly vague. And look, to Trump's credit, they are planning on follow-up meetings to kind of hash out the details of this negotiation, and that's great. But let's not get complacent because, again, there's a lot of hard work that lies ahead. And the agreement that was signed was not as detailed as agreements that were signed with North Korea previously. And they reneged on those agreements. So we'll see how this develops moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. And look, when he comes back, and one of the first things he says is they are no longer a nuclear threat. We've got this whole thing, it's all wrapped up. You then have to ask yourself, does this seem like the actions of a man who cares about the substance of denuclearization, or do they seem like the actions of a person who wants to be perceived to have had a win? Seems like the former, the latter, I should say. And bear in mind, this is a guy who has lied to us more times than anyone can possibly count about things ranging from the most shallow to the most substantive. Most recently, he had been lying about protecting people with pre-existing conditions. So anyone who is saying at this point that our obligation as members of the media is to stand up and begin applauding with our eyes closed at anything the government happens to say to us this week doesn't understand what the purpose of a free and independent media is.
Well, I think the response to this agreement that was signed by Kim Jong-Un and Trump has been, it's either good or bad. You're not allowed to talk about how much you support diplomacy, but also simultaneously criticize the vagueness of that agreement. Because if you do that in this weird topsy-turvy, no nuance allowed world, you're against it. You're against diplomacy. You want to nuke North Korea. You want to engage in nuclear war. Of course that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, look, of the people who are uniformly just in favor of it, you have the state media, Fox News. You have that. So if you want people who are just going to be a chorus of applause for Trump, you have that. I actually don't know if there's anyone who represents the sort of straw man, this person secretly really wants war with North Korea, except possibly John Bolton and people like him, other people that are surrounding Donald Trump. Everyone else is attempting to be realistic and actually look at the content of the agreement and then think about the possibilities that going forward, what is actually likely to happen. And by the way, it's easy to sort of to look at what's on MSNBC and Fox News, or to maybe do a brief browse of Twitter and get sort of a false idea of what the American people actually think about this. I've looked at the polls, and slightly more than 50% approve of the way he's handling the situation with North Korea, which is good.
That is good,
and this is certainly a better way than it was last year when he was launching Twitter threats to them. And 25% of the country believes that this will actually lead to denuclearization, which means that a significant number of Republicans don't even believe that that will happen. And those people deserve representation in media as well. By the way, almost every single one of those people doesn't want to see any kind of conflict with North Korea. They just also don't believe that Donald Trump is being realistic or honest about what's likely to happen.
Right, and I think having Trump be realistic about the situation is important, but I want him to approach this with skepticism and openness, if you get what I mean. I don't want him to be hostile toward the North Koreans and Kim Jong-Un, because you're not going to get a deal if you approach it from that perspective. But his commentary in regard to Kim Jong-Un has come off as incredibly naive. I trust him. I trust him. But that's not good enough. You need to be a good negotiator and ensure that there are specifics in the finalized agreement. You need to have a timetable. We need to define what denuclearization means in the context of North Korea. Because denuclearization in the context of North Korea might be completely different from, let's say, the nuclear deal with Iran, because we don't have all the information necessary to understand the situation with North Korea. Remember, they've been isolated. So our intelligence with North Korea has been limited. So these are all complicated issues, and as I mentioned, you need to focus on the hard work ahead rather than congratulating yourself and making it seem as though North Korea doesn't pose a threat anymore. Finally, one thing that I came across that I thought was fascinating, because it gives you, it was foreshadowing for me at least. It gives you a sense of some of the potential disagreements moving forward between the United States and North Korea. So, of course, the state-sponsored media in North Korea responded to this agreement, and here's something that I found. Kim's vows to denuclearize were reported by state media Wednesday within that context, that Pyongyang would respond to easing of what it sees as the US hostile policy against it with commensurate but gradual moves toward the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. So A, it's really good that they're really seriously considering denuclearization. That's what that report tells me. But more importantly, who's gonna act first? It seems as though, as it stands now, North Korea is expecting the United States to act first, right? Stop with the war games, you start lifting some of those sanctions, and then we'll start denuclearizing. No, I don't think that the U.S. is going to be in favor of that.
Well, we did end the military exercises, I guess, without even talking to South Korea or our military about it.
Right.
So I guess we did act first.
Right. Well, here's the thing. We haven't actually put action behind Trump's words. From my understanding, South Korea will continue with these military exercises until they get specific orders from the Trump administration to stop, right? But Trump just said it. And so South Korea's response to that has been interesting because they said, we're going to continue until we get direct orders. But more importantly, they've been very hesitant to criticize Trump for that, because they know that sometimes Trump says things without putting action behind it. So who knows?
He comes up with something and then doesn't actually pursue it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And one other thing I want to say, I know there was a lot of talk about the way that Donald Trump spoke about the leadership of North Korea seemed kind of tone deaf in regard to their human rights abuses in the past. And look, I will say that going into this first meeting, I understand why Donald Trump is not going to sit down and then scream at him, why are you starving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of your people? Why do you have death camps and concentration camps? Why are you doing summary executions based on religion and politics and all of that? The first meeting, you're not gonna do that. I understand that. That would cut off the entire process. But the idea that you would proceed in the future without making it a part of it, that at some point, in addition to the other things that we expect to get, including denuclearization and the things that we will give, one thing that we should expect to get is human rights improvements for the people of North Korea. I am not only interested in North Korea no longer threatening constantly to kill the people living in Seoul, I also care about the millions of people living in North Korea in literally the worst conditions on earth. I care about those people as well. And so that has to be a part of this process. That is a core progressive value that can't be jettisoned just for ease of negotiations.
So I hear what you're saying, and overall I agree with you. Yesterday when we did coverage of the summit, there were two main criticisms from some audience members, right? I think one of the criticisms was incredibly unfair because it assumed that we're in favor of nuking North Korea because we criticized how vague that deal was. That was unfair. But what was fair was how naive I am in thinking that someone who commits human rights abuses himself would really genuinely care about the human rights abuses in North Korea. I mean, think about the brutality that people seeking asylum are facing under the Trump administration. He does. Look, obviously this is my speculation that's based on some of his own policies, but I don't think that those human rights abuses are really his priority.
No. And I've interviewed people who've escaped from North Korea. Like I've heard about their experiences. Maybe Donald Trump has atypical compassion and empathy that hasn't been reflected in the rest of his life. But I think it's more likely that he just wants to win. So wants a win. So best case scenario, he happens to stumble into actual peace as a result of wanting good PR. That is what we should be hoping for the best interest of the people of North and South Korea.
Two easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.